At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker. She comes from Madison. She's a professor. She's the chair of the Department for Life Sciences Communication, and we're lucky to have her. You can see a couple of discussions that she's done online, usually having to do with the intersection of science and media and public policy. And she's fascinating, and we're lucky to have her here. So I introduce to you all, and I'll sit down, Dominique Brossard. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So again, my name is Dominique Brossard. You can see by my accent that I'm not original from Wisconsin by roots, but certainly by heart. I fell in love with this state. I actually got an American citizenship since being here. And I've been working really hard with a lot of communities around Wisconsin to try to encourage sustainability, make sure that we can actually all together work towards building resilience in our communities and making sure that we find what bridges where we can stand together and talk about complicated things. So I've been asked to talk about climate change and how to have different conversations, but I'm going to start by talking about different things, actually. In order to be able to understand or to think about how to talk about climate change, we still, at the end, need to understand why people feel a certain way about climate change. I mean, it's like, communication at its core is that only by understanding where people are coming from that we are going to be able to talk to them about things that matter to them, to us, and to all of us. So explaining public attitudes is going to be the first step towards really finding out what are the lessons that can be gained that would help us having those productive conversations. So something that we very often forget is that Americans, by and large, know that climate change is happening. I mean, that's the thing that's complicated. So they may know that it's happening, but they may not launch into action and policy as much as we would like them. So this is data from 2020 from colleagues of mine at Yale and University of California, Santa Barbara, and where they tracked adults who think climate change is happening. And in 2020, by the way, you can put your county and so on, and you can estimate, what is the number of people in that county. Don't do that. I mean, I actually fought with them saying this is not the way to do it because you have 5 people in a county that doesn't represent the county. I'm a statistician. What I do is I build models, try to explain public attitudes and so on, and then you actually infer from those models patterns. But you cannot do that at the county level with 4 people. So that's why I show you that. So it looks good, but don't do it. But at the university, at the United States level, this is actually correct. And you have 72% of adults who actually think climate change is happening, or climate change is happening. As you know, though, people differ in the level of concerns, and very often it's concerns that prompt action. And what happened is my colleagues have designed what we call the 6 Americas. I don't know if you heard about that. So it's the number of people that feel in the alarm category, those that are actually the concern category, the cautious, the disengaged, the doubtful, and the dismissing. And if you look at those numbers, you see that actually the alarms, and I bet a lot of people in this room will fall into this, 26% that are, alarmed or concerned, 29% that are most motivated, that really want to do something about it, and are really, really concerned. On the other hand, you see the dismissive and the doubtful, the dismissing being only 8%. Well, you know what? Think about statistics and you think of a normal curve. This follows everything. You always have a bunch of people in the extremes. In this case, the good news for us that are concerned, and we are a lot of us that actually are concerned and want to do something. And the good news is actually the dismissing is a really small group. So lesson number 1, let's ignore the dismissive. We don't change the views of people that are very extreme in their view, and it's actually we need to fight our battles. There's always, we tell our students, you at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your great aunt that doesn't think like you, don't engage in a conversation. Have fun with your great aunt and enjoy the turkey, right? That's what we say. So same with climate change. You are with somebody that like falls into like the very dismissive category. If the goal is for you to talk about climate change in order to change and promote action, which I assume, maybe I shouldn't, I assume everybody in this room, that's where you want to do, then I would actually highly recommend that to pick your battle, and sometimes it's not worth actually engage in the dismissive. The good news, though, is from a psychology perspective, this middle ground that for some reason my thing doesn't show in the thing. As a general rule, psychology of attitudes tells you that people that are in the middle, that are ambivalent about things, can change their view. We actually can. And the way to do it is to have those productive conversations, is to actually engage people in a way where they feel that we're not against them, but we're actually working with them toward a common goal. So that's good news. By the way, I've been working in science and risk communication for the last 30 years. That wasn't good news 30 years ago. The numbers were not like that. They were like, like we had very, small numbers on both sides and large number in the middle. It was really hard. So obviously, we need to take action very fast, but like the terrain is there to have those conversations, which was not the case, a decade or so ago. The other good news is the majority of Americans believe that climate change is caused mostly by human activity, right? So global warming is happening 72%, and global warming is caused mostly by human activity is 57%. So it seems 32% think that it's caused by natural causes. I'm sure you're going to know what I'm going to tell you then. Is it worth fighting what causes it? I see people shaking their hands. Good. It's not. What actually we work on with different workshops within in sustainability, we don't even talk about what causes climate change. We know there's the climate is changing, heat is happening, it's hurting our kids, pollution is hurting our kids and so on. Let's find renewable energy that's going to fight it. We don't even attack the cause if this is the problem, because we know that a bunch of people here, 32%, think it's due to natural causes. So we won't change their mind on a solution if we try. So that means that we're beginning to talk about, more complicated policy solution. I'm talking about how to engage the conversation, right? I'm not talking about let's right away, doing something that's going to change our climate, which would be really great if we could do, but definitely try to find a way not to go that way. But are those beliefs really what we want to do, right? We want to convince people that human beings cause climate change. Do we want to convince people that it's happening 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and so on? Is it really what we want to do? Well, no, we're not. Because you know what? Again and again, our science, my science, social science, tells you that information and giving information to people is not what changed their views. That's not how we work. No, unfortunately, it would be great as a professor. I wish my students would listen to me in class and then change their views afterwards. Well, obviously, it matters a little bit. But most of the time, knowledge, actually, knowing or understanding the science does not mean that people will change their attitude, because what we do is we don't use knowledge to have attitudes. We use mental shortcuts. We actually have things that make the image in our head click. We have pictures in our head that connect the dots, and suddenly we're like, whoa, that makes sense to me. That's what we need to understand. The picture people have in their heads. And very often, just knowledge, information, and so on, that is not put into the narrative that I put pictures in their head, actually fails to convince people. And that's where it gets very complicated. Because when you want to explain attitudes toward climate change, all of us will have different reasons to believe what we believe. Because we are in different social, political, cultural contexts. Beautiful Dole County, look at that. You're in heaven here. It's like amazing, and then go and you're in the middle of Southwest Chicago, very different reality, very different social, political, cultural context, right? Information climate, what we read, the amazing speakers, I should say that it includes me. apart from me, the emergency speakers that come here, like, you know, like the information that you see, that you read, the way it's framed, and so on. And at the end of the day, what's left explaining how we all feel about climate change, those individual characteristics, our knowledge and education, is actually pretty small in the model. It's really explained a lot by the rest of, so if we cannot really know what people bring to the table as far as what they read, who they talk to, how they interact, the social, political, cultural context, you know, the church they go to, the community center, and so on, we cannot really talk to them about much. We cannot, and that's why communication is complicated, right? By the way, I teach a risk communication class, and a student told me this morning, it's very easy to have an A in your class. I already decided. I'm like, wow, I taught only for a week. He's like, whatever you ask, I have to say, it's complicated. I'm like, oh, good student. It is indeed complicated. All right, so like with the problem that we have, and it is a problem. I mean, I do workshop for science writer, journalists all the time. I mean, most people find out about, you know, like the sciences through media. And through media, headlines, visuals, metaphors, the sources that cited, you know, all these provide those cues I was telling you about in your mind that's connect to you. The reason I show that is because after all, we are in the dairy state. And so like, you know, this title, how feeding cows seaweed could affect climate change, may resonate with people in Wisconsin. You show that to French people, they'll say, that's weird. Okay, why do you do that? And so on. So my point is, those words that connect the dots, that those messages that are framed in a narrative is something that media do all the time. And we may not realize that. Take home message to our friends, the NGOs here, partner with social scientists that know those, you know, tricks and so on, because there are tricks, obviously, in writing in a way, using keywords, loaded words, or so on, to make sure that it resonates with the specific audience you have in mind. Why is that working? Technology. All right. Let's see. I'm sure it's going to work. Here you go. Yeah, so communication does not happen in a vacuum. I was telling you we have those mental shortcuts. So a way to think about it is that imagine your mind as being, you know, a big filter, a big, you know, flour filter where you wanted to actually make sure that your flour is really thin. So what you do is everything that comes through those filters, all the media information that comes, is filtered to what we call perceptual filters. And those could be political ideology, but it could also be religious belief, it could be deference to science, any strong value you held. And by the way, true for me, true for Jeff, true for everybody in this room, even if we do our best not to do that, it's called motivated reasoning. We do that. We filter things, we discard things that do not agree with what we think, or we actually confirm our belief. Confirmation bias, disformation bias, and so on. It's complicated. So the idea is, going back to my first point, is that to find a bridge where we can stand together that's not going to get into that rejection in order to be able to talk about complicated topics. Because at the end of the day, any given information may be interpreted differently by different people. And as a matter of fact, at the end of this talk, I would go around and ask you what you remember. Some of you remember my French accent, others remember that I have blue in my hair, and another person will say, wow, risk communication is really what she talked about. So we all get something depending on what we are, you know, paying attention to, and we filter to different things. It's really complicated, the fact that any information means the same thing. So at the end of the day, the good news is that we can do things about it. So low information public, right? We don't like to have massive amount of information. We filtered without really knowing. We filter through our values. And first of all, we kind of think, well, we don't think, but what we do is like, how much information do I need to decide? We're cognitive miser, we call it in psychology. That means as little as possible. As a general rule, apart like, oh, you see a captive audience, like here today and so on. I'm talking patterns here, right? So how much information? Second thing is, How do media, the thing that I read around, how do they interpret that? How do they present that? Connecting the dots, try to find dots, connecting with what I know. And finally, how do those things that I see that have been filtered to my values, that have been presented around me, how do they feed my belief and other values? Which means it's going to be like I wish I could give you a magic potion. I wish I could give you like a one-size-fits-all on how to do that. Is that we need to understand the special context in which people operate. Talking to people in Egg Harbor, I love going to little restaurants, engage conversations and finding out. Actually, you know what? My accent helps me in a weird way because people, they don't think of me as that lefty weird professor from Wisconsin. They're like, from Madison, they're like, oh, and those professors in Madison. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a professor. Yeah, but the other ones, the Americans. So the idea that, in a weird way, they accept me much more than if I was a Wisconsin professor from Madison. You see what I mean? So to be able to talk to people in a way that they don't think you judge them, in a way, if you're not from there, helps. But if you are from there, it helps too, because you know that context. You know their reality. You know where they're coming from, and you know the specific context in which people operate. All right, I'm just going to give you a brief things about risk, because this is when we talk about climate change, we need to talk about risk, right? One thing that again and again social psychology tells us is the risks that kill people the most and the risks that upset people the most are most often unrelated. You know one of the most dangerous technology we use all the time? Cars. Are people scared about cars? Nope. People are very scared to fly. People are super scared to take a plane. And actually, the probability of dying when you fly or a car is much higher when you take your car, right? And is it because we're familiar with the risk? We make the decision to take it, and so on. We get upset about risky issues based on their potential impact in our life, potential impact. If we don't see that potential impact, we're not upset. At the end of the day, risk from an engineering perspective is just a hazard. Risk from a social science perspective is hazard plus outrage. The thing that outrage people, the perception that people have about a risk, that's what, upset them. Therefore, that's what we need to find out. Are people actually concerned that their kids are going to be having asthma because that coal plant is polluting? Are people concerned about flooding happening more often? And are people concerned about potential Lyme disease being more prevalent? Although the relationship to climate change is not very clear yet, it's complicated, but things like that. And also perception of benefits, actually. Do people see any benefits in what we tell them? Is there something for them? Because for public perception, think about the plane, the magnitude of harm is more important than the probability of harm. Going back to Wisconsin, beautiful Wisconsin, long winter. We can talk about climate change. At the end of the day, people, it wouldn't be so bad if spring was a little earlier in Wisconsin. They all think that. Quietly, I tell you, if you actually dig in, you see that people think, but in Wisconsin, we're okay. In Wisconsin, we have a lot of water. Look at California with their wildfire. We're okay in Wisconsin. That's a problem for us that I want to communicate about climate change. How do we generate the outrage for people here that's relevant to here? Well, we were talking about people that grow Christmas trees. When you plant Christmas tree, you have to plan ahead 15 years, right? Like you plant the little ones. You know what? Your crop of Christmas trees, you need to be really thinking about something else because this is going to be a problem. Oh, cranberries need a certain type of, climate. Cranberry growers. Oh, relevance. Topics that people can connect to, things that actually make them outraged, related to their life. This is the topic of conversation we need to think about, because at the end of the day, people put emphasis on those qualitative factors, the relevance to their life, how it makes them, in their livelihood and so on, and not those quantitative risk assessment. We can talk about 2 degrees, this and that and the other. This does not connect to people's mental images. So unfortunately, we haven't been communicated about climate change really in a way that resonates with people. Really, those risk perception, you go, look, the more concern is really stuff that's really not related to probability, right? By the way, this one is good for climate change. We use that a lot. People are really receptive when you say, you know, the one that are going to be hurt are kids. That's really, really, people can connect to that. Everybody wants their kid, their grandkids, and so on to be safe. People associate with less concern, you know, like things that where it's under individuals' control. That's why we don't mind about our car, we drive in it, we're familiar with it, and so on. So using those qualitative factors to try to provoke that outrage that would lead to a conversation for people that have their mental image to say, oh, maybe I should care about this more. It's actually relevant to me. I actually can see why I should care, and so on. So an example, everybody cares about health, and we've been working on health in Wisconsin with somebody that you had as a speaker, I think, Jeff, Jonathan Patz. We wrote a report end of 2020, medical alert, climate change is harming our health in Wisconsin. I can send it around. And what we did here, we did examples, statistics, and so on, all related to Wisconsin with extreme heat, flooding, ticks and mosquito, and so on, to give actually nurses and doctors, because they have the trust of their constituency, something to actually engage in a conversation about climate change. Our idea here was to have people with health practitioners talking about how health is related to climate change, to plant that seed so people could actually talk later to others. It's following the logic of psychology of risk I was explaining you about. So I don't know how I'm doing about time here, but important things to keep in mind when we talked about climate change and why the doctors is because this is really, like, human beings are so fascinated. By the way, I didn't tell you, I'm actually an agronomical engineer by training. I studied plant genetics. I worked a little bit in a big consulting company called Accenture in public health and environmental sector. And we were trying to actually convince people to, you know, change environmental behavior and so on. And I got super interested in realizing that they were not listening to us at all. I was like, why? They know, we know. I was kind of like the scientist I'm like criticizing here. I was like, come on, they should know that. I mean, I've explained that. So I went back and I did a Ph.D. in social psychology and science communication at Cornell University. And the reason I'm telling you that is because the same message with same content, you know, communicated by different people may be accepted or not. That's the trick. Imagine me, I don't know, you meet me in the middle of a trail, I don't tell you I'm a professor and whatever, and I begin blathering about communication, and you're like, okay, lady, you wouldn't believe me if I was not trustworthy, right? So that idea that it's really trust that matters and credibility, and the same message communicated by different people, well, me, it actually has lessons for us. Going back to, let's not engage with the dismissive, but let's engage if people trust us. We are trusted by someone. And by the way, you know that grandparents and the grandkids are like a cool pair. They have that bonding of trust very often that actually allows for communication. And I always say either the grandchild or the grandparents can be conduit of a lot of interesting conversations. For example, because of those trust bonds. Communication that does not account for values and concern can be worse than not communicating at all. I mean, going back to that idea, you know, the Thanksgiving table talking about topics of conversation where everybody's irritated. And you know, you don't have a good dinner at the end of the Thanksgiving dinner, that's too bad, right? The point is, when you are going against people's value, first of all, it's rude, I think, right? Everybody's entitled to their values, even if you believe you're right. I mean, I've been, you know, guilty of this many times. I'm like, you know, you're like, come on. But anyway, so this can hurt. It can actually do the worst thing and backfire. And actually, there's research that shows that when you communicate, you talk about things that go against people's values, you make them even more extreme in their attitude. And I see some people shaking their head. I bet it has happened to them. You think you're communicating and you think you're persuading, and you make actually people more entrenched in their position. And this has been again and again, social psychology has data that shows that that's what we do when we do not communicate by taking into account people's values. And very often, perception of benefits can be more important than perception of risk. Going back to my issue about climate change and talking about climate change, and maybe we shouldn't talk about climate change and why it's happening, but we could say, you know what, if we can convince the farmers in this community to have a big solar farm, this is going to bring money and potential tax dollars for the community, and maybe some funders can do. I bet you have solar panels in this beautiful building. So, can we actually talk about the benefits of an action? That's way more persuasive than actually doom and gloom. And we actually have seen again and again that with climate change, if we want action, we need to actually rely on hope and really try to ignore perception of risk, try to avoid persuading that we're right and people are wrong, and also assuming education is the only answer. By the way, again, guilty, guilty, guilty. It's easy for me preaching here when I've done all those things. I learned the hard way. I've been in, in committee meetings, town halls, and so on, where I see that really it doesn't work to do that way. And it's actually interesting to find out where people are coming from. You end up learning things, and you're like, I hadn't thought that people could think that way, and that it's a way to actually assume the conversation. But hope is way more persuasive than doom and gloom. Unfortunately, we don't see many stories of hopes related to climate change. The media have been really guilty of that, and we've been working really hard. I've been part of a project with the American Association for the Advancement of Science here, and we call it How We Respond. And what we do is we did like a big, working with a lot of communities around the United States, finding what communities are doing about climate change, how they work with scientists and community organizations on the ground, trying to do things. And we need those stories to be told so other communities see their work. And then you're at the dinner table and you say, you know that in Madison, they have, at the landfill, they get the methane and they produce energy with it. And this is great. We should do the same. What do you think about that? We save energy. Your electricity bill is going to be, and so on. The story about Madison is true. The sad part is that I had to be on a project in DC to find out what Madison was doing. So I called them. I called, the county office. I'm like, how come you didn't tell those stories? Oh, well, we do. It's like, it has to be told. Hope is important. We use those stories to tell other stories, and it shows us that altogether we are doing something way more efficient than actually doom and gloom. And I'm going to finish very quickly to discuss, to hopefully have discussion. But let's remember to listen. Do you know all this, who this is, right? All right. Do you remember at the award ceremonies where Oscars, where he was saying climate change is real, is happening now? Remember that or not? Well, risk communication people like me were very irritated. We're like, okay, just stick to acting and don't do that. Who did he convince? Nobody, all the people that thought like him. That's the thing. So it's really comforting to be with people that think like us, and we can actually share the idea and so on. And it's fine. We do that all the time, right? This is normal. But the goal is to actually try to move the needle to convince people. Let's not do that, obviously. And it's really not constructive. Contrast that with Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor of California. He did, I don't give a, if we agree on climate change, I see your question. Each and every time I post on my Facebook page or tweet about my crusade for a clean energy future, I see them. There are always a few of you asking why we should care about the temperature rising or question the science. I want you to know that I hear you. Even those of you who say renewable energy is a conspiracy, even those who say it's a slope. So I hear you. I've heard all your questions. I have 3 questions for you. Let's put climate change aside for a minute. First, do you believe it's acceptable that people die from pollution? And so on and so on, first of all. Let's put climate change and actually let's say, you're good people. You don't want people to die of pollution. So that's good communication. On the left, not good communication. if your goal is to move the needle, right? Again, if you want to actually upset people, please do what our friend did here. But at the end of the day, if the goal is to have conversation, this is not working. So in sum, when talking about climate change and other risky issues, it's, communication, again, is complicated. We need to know where people are coming from. And we cannot just assume there's a one-size-fits-all about the way to address the issue. We need to know their values and their motivations. What is the thing that makes them react? We call that an aperture in advertising. At the end of the day, marketers really know how to do that really well. They never sold soap by educating people how it cleans people. They sell soap by actually showing, how smooth it is and so on and so forth. What's indeed there for me that buys the soap? Because all soap's clean, right? So not that I want to compare climate change with soap, but I am kind of. Selling ideas, it's way more complicated. And there's a famous saying that says, why can't we sell brotherhood as easily that we sell shoes? Right? It's because you need to understand why people would care, their motivation, their values, and those shared beliefs that can be, we care about the kids, we care about our community, we care about resilience, we care about, a beautiful place such as Don County, and so on and so forth. So some are likely to resonate to those you are talking to and are relevant. So finding those frames I was telling you about, that the media made. And at the end of the day, don't assume people always trust you. And maybe somebody else should be talking to people that we're thinking about. Maybe it's not an NGO. That maybe it's the school teacher. I don't know. So finding actually the right person for the right context is really what matters. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the psychology of risk perception. And it's not easy, but I know we can do it together. Because the problem is not science in itself or the way we describe it, is the stories we tell about the science. People care about stories. I try to tell you a story today. I'm hoping to keep you, engaged and so on. I could have told you the same thing without telling you stories. And then you would have listened to me. Well, I hope you did find my talk entertaining, but I'm just assuming here. But, the idea is people care about the stories and what's in them for them. And when they think about even complicated science topic. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at here, and I hope we can engage in some conversations. And thank you so much.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, any questions? Thank you, Dominique. That was wonderful. Any questions? Any thoughts? Yeah, great. And we'll just pass the mic around.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the work of George Lakoff in neurolinguistics? The term, it's interesting, the history of the term of climate change. It was come up with by Frank Luntz, who was a Republican message maker, and he was doing it as a way to soften or minimize the impact of what I call climate crisis. It was basically an advertising technique. And I think that climate change is absolutely the wrong term to use because it's too, if you think of the neurolinguistics, when Lakoff wrote his book, Don't Think of an Elephant, if I say to you all, don't think of an elephant, what's the first thing that comes to mind? An elephant. Now, you may think of a circus elephant, and I may have a safari elephant, but we have elephant on the mind. And if I say climate change, well, that's natural in life. In fact, a lot of times change is a really good thing. I look forward to change. And it's interesting because about a year ago, Frank Luntz came out and he apologized for coming out with that term. He's actually become kind of an environmentalist now.
Yeah, he has really changed board, and he's been really helping also, in terms of politics, for voting and so on, using the same techniques.
Yeah, exactly. But
I totally agree with you. Climate change was very tactfully, changed to make sure that people wouldn't be too concerned. I think we should say climate disruption. Something. I'm all about outrage. Yeah. Remember, I want people to disrupt and it's disrupted. And we have done some testing about this term compared to climate change, and we've seen that actually people tend to react to it much more, like intuitively.
Yeah,
So
because what's happening in Pakistan right now with 1/3 of the nation underwater is not change. It's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. And it is a preview of of the kind of things we're going to be changing.
But remember what I was telling you at the beginning, and by the way, it's the same with, death tax or like income tax, whatever. Like there's all those terms that are, strategically used in a way to elicit what we want from the voters. So there's a lot of research, and I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah.
By the way, I could come back and give you other lectures about a lot of things, but this is a very good.
The last thing I would say is that book, Don't Think of an Elephant, it's short. And you can read it in a day or so. So anyone who's involved in doing communication on climate issues, I'd really urge you to check that out.
What's tricky too, though, is like if you remember those numbers I showed you about the concern, alarms, the dismissive. The sad part of it is that there's something that we call psychological distance, for concept in psychology, and a lot of people feel psychological distance from climate change because, again, we're in beautiful Wisconsin. So for you, based on your context, you actually can relate to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on. Most people say, oh, yeah, it's sad, but then they forget about it. So your point about the words is extremely crucial, but how can we find exemplars where people can connect? Because most often, sadly, this is too far, it's too distant, it's not relevant to people's life for them to actually make a difference. Not us in this room where we're already concerned and alarmed, right?
I would just say that I think neurolinguistics can open the door.
Yeah, that's a great point. I totally agree.
Like if I'm a parent with young children and somebody talks to me about climate threat, well, I don't want a threat to my children. And again, what is it, 95 or 98% of our decision making is made emotionally.
Exactly.
It's not made cognitively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have a psychologist in the room. I'm so happy.
I was a psychotherapist.
Thanks for those comments. I mean, super important, and it's true. I second the gentleman's situation. Really worth reading this short book.
Great. Any other questions, thoughts, feedback?
The media doesn't really like to cover bad news, and climate change and all the related things that are occurring are basically negative, and it's not pleasant to think about all the negative things. So often our media, which affects our views on everything, wants to come with positive stories. Unfortunately, we don't always get the real facts out there, and maybe it isn't even the facts that make the difference. It's the way it's presented. If you watch Fox News and you watch it continually, you believe in whatever they're saying. If you watch CNN, you believe in what they're saying.
Right.
We've got to get the story out about what is really
happening.
And I understand what you're saying. We need to get that out positively as opposed to negatively with the right word choice, but we need to get that out, and we're not really getting that out, at least locally, I don't believe.
I agree with you, and that's why, like we organize, when was that, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, we organized a series of workshops at UW-Madison with nonprofit, renewable energy, utilities, and so on, bipartisans. I can send you the report, Jeff, if you're interested. And the idea was, how can we get those stories out for people on the ground? There's a lot of things that are happening on the ground. My point is, there's not enough. We know that. But, is that the ball gets rolling by examples. There's that famous, Everett Rogers, a curve of adoption. So you have the early adopters, people are looking and they, well, you look at that, they're doing that, and then they adopt, and then suddenly there's that curve where everybody adopts. We want that at the community level. We want communities to think this is what you do. You have to do things. Look, those communities, they did it. That's what they did. Show those, have those stories, show engaged citizens, and so on. And they only by those stories at the local level to make it relevant for people, we can actually induce action. Totally on board. These are the 2 great points. Yes?
I don't mean to be argumentative, but having spent some of my working life in the media, I think the media love bad news.
Yeah, they do.
And but it seems to me the bad news that the media go for is more immediate, more, you know, if it leads, it bleeds, and so that raises in my mind the question about how do we get some of this sense of immediacy into our approach to the media and our attempts to get them to pay more attention.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the thing that is hard to digest sometimes is that at the end of the day, the role of the media is not to educate anybody. So hopefully it would be to inform, to entertain, and so on. But they have a job to do. They have deadlines every day and so on. So they, as you say, they're going to report on the plane crash, big images, lots of sad people and so on. It makes a good story. Or like, you know, like a terrible like catastrophe somewhere, and when it's not even relevant to people's on the ground. But this being said, there's a lot of journalists out there that want to do good. I have a network of journalists that want to make a big difference. As a matter of fact, today, I mean, I recorded it because I was coming here today, but I was part of the Cap Times Idea Festival in Madison. So it's like, you know, with a bunch of speakers, interacting with audiences, trying to train journalists and doing stuff. There's a lot of journalists that want to do a good job. And very often, local journalists, obviously, they care about their community. I don't know if there's journalists in their room. So if it's our job to reach out to them with the story. It's our job to actually provide the material so they can, you know, like finish their deadline, have a good story that people in the community are going to read and enjoy and like and comment and so on. We cannot just sit in a chair and hoping those stories that will be published. If we don't reach out and do the job, those stories won't be told. So that's why I think it's all of us our responsibility to make sure that this happens, because you're right. You know, they do their job, they report on the easy, negativity pays and sells, and so on. So that's why, you know, like those stories of hopes we were talking about. When we did that report on the climate change is hurting Wisconsin with my colleagues, you know, we did a press conference. I mean, you need to be able to do that and have the means, right? But I mean, I'll be happy to partner with whoever wants my help for anything related to science communication. We did a little press conference. We put all our heads together. Who do we know as journalists? You know, and we sent personal message. Hey, this is actually going to be a good story. Come. And they came, and we got maybe 5 or 6 stories. 5 or 6 stories in Wisconsin. We were very proud of ourselves. So that means that how many people read it, how many people potentially talked to their family about it, and so on. Get the roll bowling. Yeah. Over there?
See, like part of this
Sorry.
change seems to be about scale. It's like finding what scale to present the information to. Do you want to know what's in your neighborhood, in your, you know, your larger town, your whole county, or the state, and then it goes all the way out to the world. So I think that scale piece, a lot of times the local communities is missing for like what can I do right now in my community to make a difference? And then is the science and the data keeping up with what people do and showing that positive side of like this was the change that was made. It seems like a lot of times this is what's being lost.
So you know the good thing about coming to places like this and talking to people like this is like it makes me hopeful, because I hear all those good comments that you have, and you are like all like on the right place, and you know intuitively what needs to be done. You're exactly right. General numbers, you know, disconnected to the community and so on, do not actually lead to any action. You need to find things that are relevant at the local level, that people care about, where they see there's an impact. That's why I was giving the example of, you know, bring another community where they have a farmer that actually, instead of farming dairies, because no offense, dairy is not going very well right now, he actually went and installed a bunch of solar panels. So now we take this farmer and we go to all the communities and he talks about it. Not that we want to destroy dairy farmers, please, no. But the idea is having examples that people, you know, who are you talking to? Are you talking about to farmers? Talk about farmers. from farmers. Bring farmers that have implemented some things, you know, that are going in the sustainability realm. There's a lot of examples. And as a matter of fact, if there's something that's called the Wisconsin Film Festival in Madison, you know, every year, organized by the university. It's a really big event. And the interesting thing is, like, the Dairy Farming Association of Wisconsin was one of the sponsors. And the little movies that you had at the beginning were all about dairy farms that were super sustainable, doing great examples and so on. I'm in Wisconsin, I was taking notes. How come I don't know those farmers to bring to my class? You know what I mean? You know those stories at the local level, the impacts, how it helps, how he has changed the livelihood of the local communities are the ones that need to be told.
I found this very interesting, so thank you. So I'm the editor of our local newspaper, the Peninsula Post. Yeah. And what I find very interesting is the conversation about framing these stories. And for a local newspaper, I can say that the demands, you're covering all different areas of the community, and so the environment, climate change, and what's happening there might be about 10% of that. So working with the local communities that are doing this full-time, coming to the local media with stories that you can pitch and that you can sell to local media. It's not that we don't want to do it. I spent half of my career as an environmental reporter. So it's not that reporters, especially at local media, don't want to do the stories. It's that we no longer have the people power to be able to do that kind of thing. So it is so important for the Climate Change Coalition and other organizations like this to be able to tell us, here's a good story of something, of putting stories about action, as and you indicated, and hope. This is something that we can do, and I see this all the time. People are sending constantly letters to the editor with facts and figures, and you know, I tell them, I need your sources, we need to fact check them, and they want to get them in so badly, and all I want to tell them is, you're not convincing anybody with this. I see it all the time.
I know.
We need to be able to connect at a human level, and how do we do that? By telling human stories. And so being able, if I could spend all of my time coming up with those stories and relating them to things that are happening in the community, I would love to do that. But we can't. And so anybody who is invested in these issues and who wants us to get those messages out there, be our partner. Because we're there and we can do that. So I just wanted to put that out there. Yes. So there was not a question in there, just a comment.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't contradict me. It was really good. But, you know, like, this is so true. I mean, again, most of my students end up working in the, you know, like science writing, environmental writing, and so on. And they have their audience, you know, like good in mind. But, you know, if you have to write a story about the dead end and so on, you cannot be constantly, like, scrambling to put them together. We need to bring you the stories. And we need to bring you the angle and so on in a way that you can use them. That's very true. Yeah.
Great.
So you're lucky. You have actually a well-meaning editor here. This is really good. So I'm going to check. If you don't send good stories, you know, you're on the spot now.
Yes. Great follow-up to Deb's great comment. Do you have good examples that you've seen, either specific stories that really hit on the human level, like that get the facts and also get all the other factors on effectiveness?
Well, on top of my story, I would actually advise you to go to that AAAS thing that we've done, where we have all those stories with different communities, and we actually work with journalists in writing those stories to give example of the kind of thing that resonate with people. And obviously they're all around the United States, but you know, just to give you know, a taste of the type of thing that happened and how you can talk about that, not just by doom and gloom, because that's not how we change people's mind, but by actually showing action and what he has done, and the partnership between scientists, social scientists, journalists, like NGOs and so on, have actually been fruitful and have changed, the local community. So I can send you the link, and then you can search and so on, and I'll be happy to send it around.
Great. Questions?
Trying to frame this. I've worked in climate for about 30 years now on climate change. Matter of fact, I worked at your alma mater, at Cornell University, on their $1 million climate action plan.
Oh, wow.
Where you actually have to figure out, okay, how are you going to do this at the scale of a campus that's probably as big as Door County, I mean, in terms of population. I raise this because I was thinking about what you're saying about we need stories and we need to show hope. I think that's not even coming close to what we need to do, because I think there is, what are you really trying to tell people? What are you telling them so that they can say, if I do this and other people do this, it's going to make a difference? I don't see that story coming out of the climate change advocacy community. I see all kinds of people and all kinds of political and financial interests saying, oh, now we're going to make some serious money. I have a whole lot of colleagues that are running around thinking about the federal money that's going to be dribbling down. But we really have not done our homework to figure out, okay, if we do these things over the course of the next 30 years, by 2050, we're going to be there. And maybe I missed something, because I've been coming up here for the bulk of the summer. I've been kind of reading and trying to get a sense of what's going on in one of the wealthiest counties in Wisconsin. Yeah. Okay, so did I miss something, or has Door County actually engaged in the technical effort of developing a climate action plan that inventories all the possible things you can do, which are most cost effective and which would actually get you to climate neutrality? Well, then I will say this, having done this, you haven't done your homework. And I don't know what story you can tell people. Because if I'm sitting opposite you and you're just saying, we got to do something about the climate, I'll say, I agree. What do you want to do? I don't think you're in a position to, because I don't think people are looking for hope. They can't, it seems to me a very reasonably intelligent person, anyone in Door County, when this story is presented them, can say, I'll be glad to do this, but persuade me that it'll make a difference.
For sure. And it depends, but I would argue, though, that you cannot take for granted that you know what will persuade people. That for some people, it may be, like I don't create more jobs for the county, I don't know, and for others, it may be something else. So I agree with you that actually, like, the job to do what would make the most, difference to be carbon neutral in the county, like that engineering risk assessment side of things needs to be done. But I also argue that there's a lot of work to be done in the social psychological side of things, that you're trying to understand where people are coming from.
All kinds of techniques associated with what to do once you figure out what the message is, but I'm going to suggest you don't know what the message is yet. So what are you trying to communicate when you're using all these techniques?
Well, I know what I'm trying to communicate, but I mean, I'm not working with the climate change coalition.
Because
here.
I think it's really reasonable for a person to say, I don't think that if I do something and I sacrifice all my other priorities in life to do that, family, whatever,
so
it'll make a difference.
So there is, I mean, and not that I want to defend I don't know who else you have talked to, but I mean, you have brought my colleague Steve Varnos here. You have brought a bunch of people that actually are part of WICI, Wisconsin Coalition for Climate Change Research here in Wisconsin, that have done their homework. And I can send you things. I don't know particularly about Door County, but I'm sure, I hope you've done your homework, because you're right. That would be the first step, obviously. Yes?
We have this conversation with county things as well, is that there is only so much impact you can do with a small population when the problem you're talking about is at a more global scale or even a state scale. So like if we have air pollution issues in Door County, even if we have the perfect things put in place here, it's coming from bigger urban areas along the lakeshore. And it's not to blame it on others, you can still do better here, but that's that scale thing again. Do you work on federal changes, state changes, county changes, or just in your own town?
Well, the thing is that honestly, the problem is that you have to work at all levels, but we cannot do everything. So I think like, there's different people that do different things. I mean, I've been involved, the Nature Conservancy, for example, has been very involved in trying to be active on the issue of climate change. They have their role to play at a certain level. They can do a role at the national level. They're very powerful. They have a lot of money and so on. At the state level as well, they are doing a lot of lobby and so on. So what I'm talking about here is just the average Joe. I want people to actually be, part of the conversation. But you're right, you're not going to do solve climate change because we put solar farms in the farm in Door County. But we need also these different levels. And those workshops I was talking about that we did in Wisconsin, we had utilities. When you begin talking about utilities, it's super complicated, right? And then you have the reservations and the tribe that have different systems and so on and so forth. It's complicated, but the thing is we shouldn't complications stop us from trying to do things. And at the end of the day, we do need to actually try to actually talk about this because a lot of people, they're still in the, I'm not dismissive, but I'm just sitting there and I don't know really what to think about. And on top of that, no offense, the issue has been politicized from the start. Do you think it was a good idea to have Al Gore do the movie Inconvenient Truth? I mean, that already question already slanted. You never ask a question like that. It was not a good idea. Al Gore, presidential candidate with one of the most contested elections in the United States until the more recent one, that went to the Supreme Court. Democrat, he read Democrat on his face, and then he does a movie about climate change. Bingo. United States, climate change is a democratic issue. Not in France, not in other countries. It's been politicized from the start. We're fighting that too. That's why we even don't talk about climate change, we talk about renewables and so on. So yes, all those levels, but it shouldn't stop us from trying at least. Obviously, with what the gentleman has said, that with also the concrete, solutions and the cost-benefit analysis of what, way you have to move forward. So all the levels, indeed, are necessary. I mean, obviously, I believe that we needed to stay in the Paris Climate Change Accord, the fact that we went away, that was down, but we're back, and so on. All those levels have to be taken into account.
Oh, good.
I love how you ended the talk with sort of the power of storytelling and stories. And I said I love how that Dominique ended the talk with the power of stories and human storytelling. And I'm curious, we talked a bit mostly about local news and local journalism. And I'd wonder if you have anything to say about other types of media, like documentary film and the power of those sort of human interests and social media and podcasts and these other areas.
I have a lot to say. Okay. Remember, I teach communication and science communication, and actually my thing is social media and so on. And actually, I'm working with a bunch of people in Hollywood, actually doing documentaries, but it's more in the area of human gene editing. I'm working on new technologies and so on, and the social, ethical, and legal consequences of new technologies. So, working with those filmmakers in trying to say how narratives embedded in the documentaries are changing people's mind or not is actually, we think, is the future. Because Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and so on, people now decide what they watch. TV in itself is dead, right? People are actually going to choose their media diet. We actually are deciding. So we need to actually put into their hands something that could, change their mind. We are doing a lot of research on YouTube right now. We're very concerned, extremely concerned. That's another area we're working on the area of artificial intelligence and algorithm. When people search things on Google, on YouTube, what ends up being in their hand, what are the algorithms deciding, why is it done this way, and so on. And we're working really hard with people in those different, big companies to try to have the ethics of all these be taken into account. Going back to your point, lady in the back, we're trying to find in all the levels. So, it's not like I'm talking about community and stories here because that's what I was asked to talk about. But algorithms and news, that's important too, and so on and so forth and so forth. Podcasts, very important too. I mean, I could go on and on and on. But yes, you hit all the right points here. Those are all, the medium that we need to think about. Yeah.
I have a question getting back to the credibility of the messenger theme. And so I'm a partner in responsible investment, sustainable investment firm. And this industry suddenly is being attacked.
Yeah.
And it's rather new. But what I'm seeing is that some of the folks that are attacking sustainable investing are viewed to be very credible people.
Yeah.
And they're telling the opposite story of what we're telling. And I think the same thing has happened with climate change. So if we're trying to communicate with somebody who has already heard a message from a messenger that they view to be very credible, how do you feel is the best way to combat that?
So that's a tricky one, right? So if they heard something from a credible source, obviously they are more likely to believe them. I am assuming that they don't find your firm credible, or
No, I'm not even saying that necessarily, but they, if.
But I'm saying your firm as an example.
Yeah, if there's just a discussion about it, we've had clients that are on board, but they're reading things from people that they believe to be credible that are countering some of the things that we've talked to them about in the past. And it's creating doubt.
So this is interesting because it goes a little behind my talk, but this is an example of, no offense, brand management and crisis management. It's crisis communication that, when you are like the credibility of a brand, in this case is a responsible investment that's attacked, what can you do to actually counter that? So speak first, be truthful, never contradict yourself, never criticize the media, never come back and put in doubt the credibility of others because you end up hurting yourself and so on. I can send you some tips that I give in my class, but this is really more about crisis communication and credibility of a brand. And companies face that all the time, by the way. It happens to all the companies, when, let's say, there's a product that's recalled or things like that. But it is true that I agree with you that it's so frustrating when we see people that actually are credible, that they should know better, right? But the thing is, we cannot say that. We cannot say they should know better because then we hurt ourselves, our credibility when we say that. Yeah, I empathize.
Coming back to the neurolinguistics idea, if you take a look at the shift in political views in this country, and Fox News, whatever you think of them, they are good at what they do. They really know how to do it. And if we take a look at the shift in political views that have happened, speaking of this gentleman's question, they have been able to take people who in the past were moderates or even liberals and turn them into far-right people. And they did it. They're masters at neurolinguistics. And the left, quite frankly, sucks at communication. They have no idea. So I think it's a great opportunity for environmentalists, people who are concerned about human rights, equality, corporations paying their fair share, etc., There is a great opening to be using communication in a way that is effective, even with people whose minds are made up, because Fox News did that. So.
I don't think there was a question there. I'm joking.
Any other questions, thoughts?
What a great audience. Those are such good points.
Well, great. If there's no more questions or thoughts, yeah, Mary or Dick?
We're in Packerland, and I'm wondering what use you think sports heroes are in terms of communicating climate issues. Sports heroes.
You think in Aaron Rodgers? He didn't get a good job with COVID. I mean, but I don't know if you have Packers fan in the room, but he really irritated me on this one. You know, like, it's interesting because I have, remember I show you Leonardo DiCaprio and so on. So it's like the whole, like, you know, like star communicate about issues has to be taken carefully. But certainly, you know, if it's communicated with kids or some, depending on the context, it can work. But it needs to be managed, I think, very carefully. Because at the end of the day, you want to control your message and so on. So it depends on the context. Again, it depends how, talking about what, and for, with which outcome in mind. Because whenever you have a communication exercise, you have a goal. What are you trying to do? So if you don't know that, and you know exactly what you're implying by, you know, including these people in the conversation and so on, it can go both ways. I think it depends. Why, do you have like some planning that you're...
Well, I'm such not a sports person, but there's a baseball player in Milwaukee who has been very articulate speaking about climate issues. And I was just translating that into our closer team and wondering if we should make some sort of small effort to reach out to that team.
It cannot hurt. It cannot hurt to have the conversation. Yeah. Right.
Great. Wonderful questions, wonderful dialogue. This is exactly what we were hoping for to set this discussion up. The conversation, of course, continues. I take a lot of the comments and questions very seriously and to heart. We have to do more. We are not communicating the exact relevance to everybody. So that is our role. That is our mission at Climate Change Coalition. So yeah, please let this be the beginning and the continuation of the discussion. If you have suggestions for me on other programming, as well as other actions to do, I'll stay here after, but also, you know, with our documentation, you have my email and phone number and things like that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here for this dialogue, and thank you, Dominique. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.